Hello there, welcome to HFY Quantum Pro. Here, helping one another makes the universe smarter. So, what we are waiting for? Let's begin our story.
The supply drone moved down the line without slowing. It dropped a blade into each set of waiting hands, steel, standard, clean, and kept going. No ceremony, no speech, just a soft click of metal changing owners 43 times in a row. Nora was 31st in line. She watched the students ahead of her receive their blades and step back into place. The Turvery boy near the front held his in all four hands at once, testing the grip with each one. A pair of Lareshi students compared theirs quietly, tilting the flat of the blade to read the etch marks. A broad, stone-gray Calthary near the wall did not even look at his. He simply tucked it under his arm like it was a thing he had always owned. When the drone reached Nora, she held out one hand. The blade dropped into her palm. It was heavier than it looked. The grip was too wide for a human hand by about a thumb's width, but that was fine. She had trained with worse. She stepped back into line. Instructor Vin stood at the front of the room. He was tall the way a dead tree is tall, thin, gray, and carrying the look of something that has survived a long time through patience alone. He had four limbs, a flat face, and eyes that did not blink the way most eyes do. He spoke Galactic Standard with a flat, dry tone that made every sentence sound like it had already been said 100 times before. "This blade is your responsibility," Vince said. "If you lose it, you train without one. There are no replacements. This is not a punishment. It is a lesson. Do not lose your blade." He paused. "You will lose other things here. Equipment breaks. Plans fail. Conditions change. The blade is just the beginning. Learn to hold what is yours." Nora looked down at the blade in her hand. She turned it once, slowly. The edge was fine. Not exceptional, but fine. She could work with fine. The student next to her shifted. She looked up. A small, bird-bone creature stood there. Narrow chest, large dark eyes, feathers that lay flat against the side of its head in a way that Nora had come to recognize from her time on transit ships as nervousness. "Lareshi, young, this is your first term?" the Lareshi asked. "Yes," Nora said. "Mine also." He glanced at her blade. "Yours fits badly." "I know. Mine also. My hands are smaller than the grip design." He paused. "I am Rail." "Nora." He gave a quick nod, which among Lareshi meant something close to "pleased to meet you." She had read that somewhere once. She nodded back the same way. He looked surprised, then pleased. Vin called the class to the training floor. The first session was not a fight. It was a movement drill, footwork, grip positioning, blade angle. Basic things. Most students struggled in predictable ways. The Turvery used too much strength and not enough precision. The Calthary student was slow, but almost impossible to off-balance. The Lareshi students were fast and light, but flinched at contact. Nora worked through the drill quietly. Her footwork was different from what Vin was teaching. It was smaller, lower to the ground, less clean. She had not learned from textbook. She had learned a yard behind a storage building on a colony world where the ground was uneven and the things you might need to fight were not going to wait for you to take a proper stance. Vin stopped near her once. He watched for 3 seconds. He said nothing and moved on. By the end of the session, Nora had a general picture of the class. The Turvery boy, she learned his name was Doss, was ranked first already, which meant he had tested into the term with marks. He moved like someone who had been trained since birth. He probably had been. He was four-armed and a full head and a half taller than the next tallest student. When he sparred in the open drill at the end, his blade work was exact and confident. He glanced at Nora once, during a pause, with the kind of look that did not quite register her as competition. She noted it and said nothing. The sparring drill at the end was light contact, no injuries. Partners were assigned by Van at random. Nora was paired with a mid-sized Dravani student. 3 legs, 2 arms, dense frame. The Dravani hit hard. Nora took the first hit on her forearm, read the pattern, and adjusted. The second hit she redirected. The third she stepped inside of completely, which the Dravani clearly had not expected. The drill ended before it resolved fully. No winner, no loser. Just a stopping point that on the way back to formation, Nora's blade caught the rail of the training platform. She felt it slip. She grabbed for it, missed by half an inch. The blade spun once in the air and dropped straight into the maintenance chute beneath the platform's edge. The sound it made going down was very small. Nora stood at the edge and looked down into the dark. The chute was sealed below. The blade was gone. She turned around. Vin was watching from the far end of the room. He had seen. He turned away and made a mark on his data board. No one said anything. Rail looked at her from across the room with an expression she could not read yet. Nora stood very still for a moment. Then she walked back to formation and stood in her place, empty-handed. The lesson, apparently, had already begun. 3 days without a blade felt different in practice than it did in theory. In theory, Nora knew she could train without one. Plenty of fighting happened without weapons. Balance, distance, body movement. Those things did not require steel. She spent the first 2 days doing exactly that. She worked the drills with her hands, adjusted her footwork, and stayed focused on the things she could still do well. On the third day, a student named Vero, a Tervery, not DOS, a broader one with gray-green scales, stepped in front of her before the afternoon session and said, in passable standard, the human came to class with no blade again. Maybe she should not be here if she cannot keep her tools. Rail, standing 3 feet to Nora's left, made a sound like a kettle beginning to boil. She lost it in a drill. You were there. Anyone could have. I was not speaking to you, Vero said, looking down at Rail the way tall things look at small things. You are now, Rail said, which was either very brave or very foolish, and probably both. Vero took a step toward him. Nora moved between them. She did not raise her hands. She just stood there in the space and looked up at Vero with the calm expression of someone who had done this particular calculation many times before. He is not worth your record, she said, and I am not worth your time. Walk away clean. Vero looked at her for a long moment. Then he walked away. Rail exhaled slowly. Thank you, he said. I was not going to back down from that. I know, Nora said. That is why I moved. He looked at her differently after that. Not with pity, with something more careful. That night, after lights dimmed in the dormitory hall, Nora did not sleep for the first 2 hours. She lay on her bunk and thought about what she had available. She thought about it the way her mother had taught her to think about problems. Not what you do not have, but what you do. She did not have a blade. She did have time, 2 free hours every third morning, scheduled as rest period. She did have access to the outer corridors during free hours, as long as she signed out properly. She had traded for a small sharpening stone with Rail 3 days ago in exchange for help reading the standard text. She had her hands, which knew things her head sometimes forgot, and she had noticed something 2 days ago when she had gone to the far end of Corridor 14 looking for a quiet place to stretch. Past the last storage bay, there was a section of the station that the cleaning drones did not reach. A refuse area. The station ran livestock in the lower habitat ring for food stock. Things died there sometimes, and were not always cleared quickly. She had seen the shape of something large through a grate. She had not thought much of it at the time. She thought about it now. The next free morning, she signed out and walked to Corridor 14 that the smell hit her before the sight did. Strong, layered, the particular heaviness of organic material breaking down slowly. She did not flinch. Growing up on a frontier colony, you learned early that useful things often lived next to unpleasant ones. Through the grate and into the refuse section, she found the carcass of a dren beast. Large, quadrupedal, used for protein stock. It had been dead for at least 2 weeks, maybe 3. Most of the soft tissue was gone or going. What remained were bones, ligament cords, and the thick outer hide beginning to harden in patches. Nora crouched beside it and looked carefully. The femur was the right size. Dense, thick-walled bone, the kind that came from an animal that spent its life carrying weight. She had seen her grandmother do this once, on the colony, when the supply shuttle was 8 months late and the settlement needed tools they could not print. Her grandmother had been a butcher before she was a hunter, and a hunter before she was anything else. It took Nora 40 minutes to separate the femur. She used a maintenance tool she had borrowed from the supply locker under a general access code. Logged properly, returned before the end of her hour. She wrapped the bone in cloth and carried it back to the dormitory inside her kit bag. Over the next 5 days, she worked on it. Every free period. Every quiet hour between sessions. She used the sharpening stone slowly, in long strokes, the way her grandmother had shown her. Angle low, pressure even, let the stone do the work. She used a second maintenance tool to rough shape the grip end. She packed the grip with a strip of insulation cord she pulled from a broken wall panel in her corridor. She tested the balance after every session, adjusted and tested again. The blade that came out of those 5 days was not elegant. It was off-white, slightly curved where the bone's natural shape had asserted itself, and shorter than regulation by 4 inches. The edge was real, but not fine. The grip was wrapped in gray cord that looked exactly like what it was that IT was a weapon. Unambiguously, practically a weapon on the morning of the next scheduled training session. Nora put in her belt loop, walked into the sparring hall, and took her place in line. The hall went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with instructor Van arriving. Students turned. Stared. Rail from across the room had his head tilted slightly to one side, reading her the way he read everything, carefully and with his full attention. Doss looked at the blade for a long time. His expression did not change much, but his eyes did. Nora stood in her place, both hands at her sides, and waited for the session to begin. Instructor Van arrived 7 minutes into the silence. He walked to the front of the room, turned to face the class, and then, as he always did, scanned the line from left to right. When his gaze reached Nora, it stopped. It moved down to the bone blade at her hip. It stayed there for 4 full seconds. Then Vin walked to the data board and called the first sparring pair. That was all. No comment. No ruling. No expression that Nora could read with confidence. The session simply began as if the bone blade were an unremarkable thing, which it was not, and everyone present knew it. Rail leaned close to her during the first rotation. He is not going to say anything. Apparently not, Nora said. Is that good? I think it means he decided it is not against the rules. Rail considered this. Is it against the rules? Nora thought for a moment. He said no replacements. He did not say no alternatives. Rail stared at her. Then he made the small, rapid clicking sound that meant in Lareshi something between "you are incredible" and "I am frightened of you." Her match came in the third rotation. Instructor Ven called her name alongside a student named Gore, a mid-ranked Tervary with pale yellow scales and a steel blade he handled with easy familiarity. Gore was not Doss, but he was bigger than Nora, stronger than Nora, and trained. They took position on the floor. Ven counted down. The match began. Gore came in fast and direct. His first strike was aimed at her right shoulder, a testing blow, not a finishing one. Nora stepped left instead of back, let the blade pass her outside, and brought her own up in a short arc toward his wrist. The bone blade connected with a dull, dense sound. Gore pulled back, surprised. He had expected her to retreat. She had not retreated. That set the pattern for the whole match. Nora was slower than him in open space. She knew that. She did not try to win on speed. She stayed close, inside the range where his longer arms became less useful, and worked the angles. She took a hit on her left side, hard would bruise, and used the momentum of it to pivot instead of fall. She came back around at a different angle. The match lasted 3 minutes and 12 seconds. She won on points. For clean contacts to his 2. When Vin called the stop, Gore stood back and looked at the bone blade in her hand with an expression that was not quite respect and not quite discomfort. Something between the two. The hall was very quiet again. Nora returned to the line. She did not look around. She already knew that everyone was watching. Drawing attention to that would not help anything. After the session, Rail found her near the water station. "Can I see it?" he asked. She handed him the bone blade, grip first. He took it with both hands and turned it slowly, studying the surface. His head moved in small, quick angles the way birds do when they're thinking hard. "How did you shape the edge?" he asked. She explained the sharpening stone. He asked about the grip wrapping. She explained the insulation cord. He asked where the bone came from. She told him plainly, the way she told him everything, directly, without softening it. His feathers flattened against his head. "In my culture," he said slowly, "we do not use bones. Not for tools. Not for anything. It is It connects to something old and spiritual. I cannot fully explain it in standard. I am sorry, Nora said. She meant it. I did not know. I know you did not. He handed the blade back. I'm not upset. I am just trying to understand how your mind worked when you made this. I needed a blade, Nora said. That was most of the thinking. Rail was quiet for a moment. For me, that would not have been possible. Not because I lacked the skill, because I would not have been able to begin. The idea would have felt wrong before I even started. Nora looked at the blade in her hand. She had not thought of it that way. On her colony world, you used bone when you had bone. You used wood when you had wood. You used whatever was there because whatever was there was what you had. The idea of something feeling too wrong to attempt had not crossed her mind. Not once. I think, she said carefully, where I grew up, we did not have the space to feel that something was wrong before we tried it. Rail made the clicking sound again, not the frightened one this time. The thoughtful one, that be why the time Nora had packed her kit for the day. Word had traveled through most of the dormitory wing. She could feel it in the way students moved around her, not avoiding her exactly, but aware of her in a new and slightly adjusted way. Like she had changed shape while no one was looking and they were all recalibrating. Doss passed her in the corridor outside the hall. He did not slow down, but he looked at the blade on her hip, then at her face, then away, and something moved behind his expression that was not the casual dismissal from the first day. She walked back to her bunk, sat down, and set the blade on the shelf beside her K. IT looked strange there, pale and rough among clean standard issue things. But it was hers, and it held an edge, and it had 1-4 contact to 2 today. She thought that was probably enough for now. The message came in the early morning, before the first session of the day. A single line on her dormitory panel. Report to Administrative Wing C, Room 7, at the second hour. Bring your training equipment. Rail saw her reading it. What does it say? She told him that he did not say anything, but his feathers went very flat. Room 7 in Wing C was small and functional. A table, 5 chairs, no windows. When Nora arrived, for people were already seated, Commandant Oral sat at the center. He was a vet Hani, broad-shouldered and wide, with 4 pale eyes and hands the size of Nora's head. He had a reputation across the academy for being fair in a way that was not always comfortable. To his left sat 2 administrative staff whose names she had not learned. To his right sat Instructor Vin, still and patient as always. Nora sat in the single chair across from them. The bone blade was already on the table. Someone had taken it from her kit during the night and placed it here. She noted this and said nothing about it. Commandant Oral looked at her for a moment before speaking. You have not been accused of anything, he said. This is a review, not a hearing. The distinction is real. Speak freely. All right, Nora said. Where did the bone come from? She told him. The refuse area, the dren carcass, the femur. Plainly, in order. You used a general access maintenance tool. The logs show you sign it out and return it on time. Yes. You used a personal sharpening stone. I traded Rail for it. It was a fair trade. Oral nodded slowly. The blade has been inspected. He glanced at Ven. Ven confirmed this with a slight movement of his head. It meets minimum structural standards for practice use. The edge is real, but not exceptional. It will not shatter in a normal exchange. Nora waited. My question, Oral said, is about intent. You understood, when you began making this, that you were doing something unusual. Yes. Did it occur to you that the rule, no replacements, was meant to teach a lesson in loss? In continuing to function when your preferred tools are gone? Nora thought about this. She gave it the same honest consideration she gave everything. Yes, she said, I thought about that, but I looked at the lesson 2 ways. The first way was, accept the loss and train without a blade. The second way was, the loss happened because I was careless for 1 second. The real lesson is to not lose the blade. I could not get the original back, so I made a new one. I thought that was closer to the right answer. Silence in the room. Point, one of the administrative staff, was writing something. Vin had not moved. You made a second blade, Oral said, because losing the first one felt like a failure, and you decided not to fail twice. Something like that. Oral looked at her for a long time. She did not look away from him. She had learned early that looking away from large, powerful things was often what caused trouble. Looking at them directly, calmly, was usually better. Vin spoke. It was the first time he had spoken since Nora entered the room. The blade passed structural inspection. I have no grounds to prohibit it under training regulations. Non-standard materials are not specifically banned, provided they meet safety requirements. This one does. Oral clasped his large hands together on the table. Then the review is complete. You may continue using the blade. He paused. I will say one more thing, and then you are dismissed. Nora waited. Most students who lose their blade in the first week come to my office asking for an exception to the replacement rule. He tilted his head slightly. You did not come to my office. You did not ask for anything. You simply solved the problem and came to training. The rule was clear, Nora said. Yes. Oral looked at her with all four of his pale eyes. It was. She picked up the blade from the table and left. Rail was waiting outside the door, sitting on the floor with his knees pulled to his chest. When she walked out, he stood up so fast he nearly hit his head on the wall. Well, I can keep using it. He made a sound like all his air leaving at once. Then, before Nora had time to understand what was happening, he stepped forward and wrapped his narrow arms around her in a hug. She stood very still. She was not used to being hugged. On her colony world, people showed care differently. They checked your equipment before you went out. They left food near your bunk when you were sick. They stayed close during hard moments without touching unless you asked. But Rail had his arms around her, and he was shaking slightly, which meant he had been more frightened than he had let on. She put one arm around him and patted his back once, carefully. It is fine, she said. I know, he said muffled. I know it is fine. I was scared anyway. That is allowed. Nora said that he let go, stepped back, and straightened his feathers with both hands the way Lareshi do when they want to look like they were not just emotional. She let him have that without comment. They walked back to the dormitory hall side by side, and neither of them mentioned it again. The team exercise assignment came 3 weeks later, slipped under dormitory doors on a printed sheet like it was nothing important. Nora read hers in the hallway. 4 names per group, assigned by the scheduling system. Her group had 3. Herself, a Cal-3 student named Brev, and Doss. She read the list twice to confirm she had not misread. She had not. The exercise brief was simple in description and complicated in practice. For connected rooms, simulated hostels at each threshold, restricted movement corridors no more than 2 shoulder widths wide. Points for objective completion, deductions for simulated injury. Time limit of 12 minutes. Nora understood immediately why her style would work in this environment. She also understood that Doss, in his usual form, would struggle. Corridor fighting was not built for forearm fighters with a long blade technique. It was built for people who could compress themselves in a small space and move fast and ugly. She did not say any of this to Doss before the exercise. She was not sure he would want to hear from her. They gathered at the exercise entrance with Brev, who was patient and solid and communicated mostly in small nods. Doss looked at the corridor diagram. He looked at Nora. He said, "You have done this kind of environment before." It was not a question. "Yes," Nora said. "Then lead the approach." She blinked. She had not expected that. "All right," she said. They went in. The first room was quick. Brev was a wall in a fight, and the simulated opposition did not account for something that wide and calm. The second room was harder. Nora took point through the connecting corridor, bone blade drawn, and cleared the threshold first. A simulated contact came from the left at height, aim for the shoulder. She read the angle, dropped below it, and came back up inside the arc clean. Doss, behind her, could not have done the same. There was not enough room for him to use his arms fully. He saw this. She knew he saw it from the slight pause in his movement as she cleared the space that be why the fourth room. They had not taken a full deduction. Minor contacts on Brev in room 3, which Brev absorbed with the placid patience of someone built like a stone wall. When the clock stopped, they stood in the final room with the objective complete and 2 minutes to spare. Doss stood in the doorway for a moment. He looked at the corridor behind them. Narrow, dark, the kind of space he would normally move through and hate. "You use terrain," he said to Nora. not just as background. You fight the room. There is always a room, Nora said, or a yard, or a field, or a tight space between two things. The ground is part of the fight. We're not taught that here. I know. I was not taught it here either. They went to the observation deck afterward. It was a wide, half-circle platform on the outer ring, transparent walls, the planet Seth Minor a large pale shape below. Brev had gone back to the dormitory. It was only the two of them. Das sat on the bench along the wall. He was large enough that, even sitting, he was close to Nora's eye level when she stood. "Tell me about where you came from," he said. She told him. The colony, the frontier edge, the wildlife, the supply shortages. The yard behind the storage building where her mother taught her footwork and her grandmother taught her everything about using whatever was in reach, that he listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "In my culture, improvising in a fight is considered failure. It means you did not prepare correctly. A warrior who improvises is a warrior who made a mistake before the fight began." Nora thought about this. "What do you do?" she asked. "When you prepared correctly for one situation, and the situation is different when you get there?" Das was quiet for a moment. "You adapt what you prepared. You apply your training to the new conditions. That is still adapting. That is still improvising. You are just using trained tools to improvise instead of found ones." Another pause. Longer this time. "I had not thought of it that way," he said. "It is the same thing," Nora said, "just with different materials." She sat down on the bench, a foot of space between them, and looked at the planet below. From up here, it looked calm. She knew from the Academy database that its surface was mostly storms and salt flats. Things often looked calmer from a distance. They sat in silence for a while. It was a comfortable silence, which surprised her. She had not expected to find Das comfortable. She had expected to find him difficult, which he was, but not in the way she had first assumed. Footsteps behind her. Rail arrived, slightly out of breath. Carrying a food pouch from the hall, he sat on her other side and handed her half his food without asking first, which was one of the ways Lareshi showed that they had decided you were theirs to look after. She took it. The three of them sat on the observation deck and looked at the storm-covered planet below while the station moved slowly through the dark, and for a while, nobody needed to say anything at all. The final assessment list went up on the wall panel outside the main hall 2 days before the end of term. Students gathered in clusters to read it. Some were quiet after. Some were not. Nora stood in front of the panel and found her name. She followed the row across to the match column. She read the name opposite hers twice, the same way she had read the team exercise sheet. Das. She went back to her bunk, sat down, and looked at the bone blade on her shelf. IT had a small nick near the tip now, from the fourth room of the corridor exercise. She had not fixed it. The nick did not affect function. She had left it because she liked the idea of a weapon that showed where it had been. She picked it up, turned it in her hands. She was not afraid of the match. She was realistic about it. Das was stronger, taller, longer-armed, and technically cleaner than she was. In an open arena, those things mattered. She was going to have to fight the best match of her life and probably still lose. She thought, that is fine. Lose well. That is a real thing to do. Assessment day, the hall was full. Not just the class, faculty, senior students, a row of administrative observers near the back. The end-of-term assessment was formal in a way the training sessions never were. The earlier matches went in order. Nora watched Rail fight. He lost, but not badly, and he had improved enough that the student who beat him had to work. She told him so afterward. He clicked happily and tried to look humble. Then Vin called her name and Das's name. They took the floor. Das looked at her from across the space between them. His expression was not dismissive anymore. It had not been for weeks. What was there now was more careful than that. He looked at her the way you look at a problem you respect. Vin counted down. The match began. Das came in at measured speed. Not his fastest, because his fastest would cross the space between them in a second and a half and leave no time for a real exchange. He was giving her a fair fight. She was not sure if that made her grateful or irritated, and decided it was both. She moved left, inside his first sweep, and brought the bone blade up fast at his lower arm. He pulled back. He had expected her to move left. She was predictable there, and he had watched her long enough to know it. He turned the pull back into a step and reset, and now she was slightly off angle, and he was centered again. He was very good. She worked the angles. She stayed close, inside the long arm zone, and kept moving so he could not settle into his best position. She took a solid hit to her shoulder in the second minute. Hard reel would hurt for a week, and used the spin of it to change direction instead of going down. She came back with the bone blade at his wrist and caught him clean. The hull made a sound. One clean contact. Not enough to win, but real. She kept going. She gave everything she had over the next 90 seconds. Every piece of footwork her mother had taught her, every angle her grandmother had shown her, every adaptation she had built over a year on hard ground and 3 months in this academy. She was burning down her reserves, and she knew it, and she kept going anyway. Doss caught her in the final minute. A long sweep, too wide to get inside of in time, and she had slowed just enough that the redirect failed. She went down to one knee. He held the blade point close, steady, and Vin called the stop. She sat on the floor for a moment. Her shoulder was ringing. Her lungs felt like wet cloth. Doss reached down with one of his lower hands. She took it. He pulled her up. That blade, he said, looking at it in her hand, has no right to be as effective as it is. That is kind of the point, she said. Vin did not give remarks at the end of assessments. It was not tradition. He called the scores, confirmed the rankings, and that was the end of the session. He had done it the same way, faculty said, for 211 years, that he did not do it that way today. After the final score, he turned to face the assembled students and staff. He walked to Nora and held out his hand. She placed a bone blade in it. He held it up. Pale, rough-edged, grip wrapped in gray cord. It looked like what it was, a thing made from nothing by hand in stolen hours. Every student in this class received the same blade on the first day, Vince said. His voice was dry and flat as always, but the room was very still. One student lost hers. I watched it happen. I did not offer a replacement because the rule is clear and the rule has a purpose. He paused. I have been running combat training for 211 years. In that time, no student has done this. He returned the blade to Nora. Consider what that means, he said. Then he dismissed the class. Back in the dormitory, Nora set the blade on her shelf. Someone had left a small object beside her kit. A strip of leather cord, neatly rolled, dark brown and well-cured. Good quality. She had not put it there. She did not know who had, and no one ever admitted to it. She picked up the cord. She picked up the blade. She began rewrapping the grip, slowly, in long, careful loops the way her grandmother had shown her with everything she had ever made with her hands. Rael appeared in the doorway. He leaned against the frame and watched her work. Are you going to keep it? He asked. After they give you a proper blade next term? Nora kept her eyes on the grip. She worked the cord around the base, pulled it firm, and tied it off the way hunters tie things, so it would not come loose on its own, ever. They can keep their steel, she said. Rael was quiet for a moment. Then he clicked, soft and warm, and went to go find Doss for dinner. Nora set the blade back on her shelf. She looked at it for a moment, pale, rough, real. Then she got up and followed Rael down the hall.